Se você tá afim de ofender, é só chamá-lo de moreno, pode crer. É desrespeitar raça, alienação. Aqui no Ileaie, a preferência é ser chamado de negão. Se você tá afim de ofender, é só chamá-la de morena, pode crer. Você pode até achar que impressiona. Aqui no Ileaie, a preferência é ser chamada de negona. A consciência é o objetivo principal. Eu quero muito mais, além de esporte e carnaval. Natural, chega de eleger aqueles que têm. Se o poder é muito bom, eu quero poder também.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Sahaim Tovim. Boa tarde para todos. Welcome to the first Synagogue of the Americas, a part of Smithsonian Folklife Festival. Thank you for joining us. Real-time captioning and American Sign Language interpretation are available during today's live program. To view the simulcast that includes these services, please use the link provided in the comments section. If you are viewing this program after the live broadcast, please note that it will also be made available on our website with closed captioning. My name is Grace Mozes, and I was born in Brazil, São Paulo. I have lots of family in Bahia, Salvador, which I visit every year. I was raised in Israel. In between Brazil and Israel, I lived in Holland, and I am an American Jew and a mother of three. Film producer. I've worked on many documentary films with Jewish content and Israeli issues. And I'm a DJ. Today, we invite you to participate in a conversation that dives into the history of the Jewish presence in Pernambuco, Brazil, and their eventual journey to North America. This event is part of the festival's Brasil, Nações do Nordeste programming and is produced with promotional partnership from the National Museum of American Jewish History. We'll be taking your comments in live chat, so please participate. If you don't know the festival, I encourage you to check out festivalsi.edu to learn about our programs, education, resources, and more. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Daniela Levy and Dr. Jacques Ribemboim. And as you can see from my intro, my Brazil, Holland, Israeli, Jewish connection, I am so flattered and honored to have been asked to moderate this important conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. There's been a lot of interest about this topic, and I hope we can do a lot more programming like this. So, Dr. Jacques Ribemboim, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and about your important work.
Well, just say hello to everyone, and I'm very glad to be here today and speak a little bit about the Jews of Pernambuco. I am a professor at Universidade Federal Rural de Pernambuco, and I wrote some books about the Jewish history in Recife, in Pernambuco, in Brazil, Nordeste, and well, that's it. Let's have a very good talk today here, a very good debate, and I would like to have the participation also of the general public.
Yeah, tell us everything. And I will be taking questions, so please participate.
May I start to speak the conference?
Yes, of course. You have the floor.
Okay. So that, I'm here to bring additional information about the Jews of Pernambuco in Brazil, the place where it was formed the first Jewish community of the New World at the beginning of the 16th century. And of course, with its first synagogues and the first rabbi, the first cemetery in the Americas. So it's very important to explicit the actual dimension of the Jews of Pernambuco in the history of Judaism, something that remains unknown or neglected by many. To begin, let's have a look at Pernambuco. What was Pernambuco at that time? And I intentionally selected a map that we show in figure 1, that's it, by the famous cartographer Gastaldi, showing Brazil in a different way, horizontalized in relation to its usual shape, that is, the north being on the right and the south being on the left. Pernambuco is situated in the northeast portion of Brazil. You can see in the map inscribed in a circle, and we can also identify some Indians cutting trees and exchanging them, the timber, with two Europeans, receiving glasses, knives, mirrors, axes, and change. All kinds of cheap things that were quite valuable and useful for them. Okay, now we can have a look. How is Pernambuco today? Let's go to figure 2. That brings us a top view of the capital, Recife, with 4 million inhabitants in the metropolitan area. Quite a modern city full of beaches and history, but with a strong social inequality that remains all over the country. Let's go now straight to the point, directly to that moment when the first Jews fled Portugal and managed to organize their tropical community in Pernambuco, even under the fear and the tears of being punished by the Inquisition. As many know, the Jewish people had been expelled at that time or converted by force, both in Spain in 1492 and in Portugal 5 years later, becoming new Christians. That's why the Jews come to Pernambuco. At that time, Brazil was being discovered by the Portuguese in 1500. And the Jewish people perhaps regarded the new lands as a chance to escape the persecution and practice Judaism freely, or at least to have some distance from Lisbon and get a little more peace. Well, an extraordinary fact took place immediately after the discovery. Only 2 years later, in 1502, the whole Brazil, the whole new land discovered, was leased by the King of Portugal to a new Christian named Ferdinand de Noronha. He was a leader of a powerful consortium of financiers, ship owners, and merchants interested in the exploitation of Brazil wood, at that time also recognized as Pernambuco wood. The main objective of the group was, of course, to make profits, but Fernão de Noronha also helped to transfer to Pernambuco some new Christian families from Portugal to Pernambuco, where he has installed the company's headquarters and its main port of embarkation for timber. And a few years later, the arrival of new Christians has intensified with the formal installation of the Inquisition in Portugal in the year of 1537. The main villages of the new colony and its economic centers at that time were Olinda and Igaraçu in Pernambuco, with a relatively large population of Sephardi new Christians, that is, those Jews from Iberian Peninsula who practiced Judaism secretly, the so-called crypto-Judaism, in order to escape of being denounced to the Inquisition. So, between 1535 and 1631, almost 100 years, the Jews maintained a secret but quite well-organized community in the village of Olinda, with the religious services being performed inside the house or in small synagogues which spread the surroundings in the casas grandes, the head houses of sugar mills and plantations.
Jacques, I
The,
wanted to ask you a
yes,
little
please.
could you talk a little bit about the crypto-Judaism? I think that's a word that not everybody is familiar with, and I
Yes,
definitely want to hear a little bit more about it.
surely, Grace. Yes, the crypto-Judaism was the Judaism practiced in secret, in the hidden way, because of the risk to
Persecution,
being, to have a process and a trial and the Inquisition. So the Jews were converted to New Christianism, so that they just cannot perform Judaism freely in an open and public way. They had to take the practice of Judaism kept in secret.
So
So this is
crypto-Judaism.
this is
Yeah, it's
crypto
fascinating.
Judaism. And the crypto Judaism was the practice of Judaism, the secret practice, during almost 100 years. As I say before, between 1535 and 1631, almost 100 years, in Olinda we had crypto Judaism, and it was practiced inside the houses. Some sort. It's very well known as esnogas. It's a Spanish term in Ladino, meaning synagogue, because it was small and hidden and practiced by this Sephardi.
How big was the community then?
Well, the community in Olinda at that time, we are talking about the 17th, the 16th century. So that there was not a big community, I mean, in quantitative terms, but from the numbers of the time, it was quite big. Some historians calculate around 20 to 30% of the whole white population from Europe in Pernambuco mainly in Olinda, was compounded by Jewish families, new Christians, formerly new Christians, some of them practicing hidden Judaism, the crypto Judaism. That's why I was saying that figure 3, please. Figure 3 can show how was one of those hidden synagogues. It's a drawing by a Brazilian artist. It's a free creation, actually, by the Brazilian artist Cavani Rosas, showing one of these synagogues with a man reading. That's interesting to observe a small Torah, small, because it was in a size that could be easily hidden. Yeah, for example, in 1593, at the time when Brazil belonged to Spain, much people don't know, but Brazil belonged to Spain during the so-called Iberian Union. The Inquisition sent Pernambuco a visitation, that is a formal mission. Visitation is a formal mission to investigate local crimes against the Catholic faith. And figure 4, please, shows another pen and ink drawing by Cavani Rosas, this time showing the arrival of the Inquisition in Pernambuco. And the visitors spent 2 years in Olinda and in the neighboring captaincies of Itamaracá and Paraíba, collecting denounces, collecting confessions. During this period, many new Christians were denounced to the Inquisition, some of whom would be sent to trial in Lisbon. Well, in 1630, Pernambuco was invaded by the Dutch, and a Jewish community was organized in Recife. Unfortunately, Olinda, the main village of that time, was set on fire, and there was not much left of the so-called Little Lisbon until the period of its reconstruction soon after the Dutch have left Pernambuco. The arrival of the Dutch, and Daniela Levy will talk about this period, the specific period of the Dutch, and many interesting aspects of this period. The arrival of the Dutch assigns the end of the crypto-Judaism in Olinda and the beginning of a new period for the Jews of Pernambuco this time practicing Judaism freely.
Okay, yeah.
I will talk just a little bit about this period because I know that Daniela will have a lot to tell us. But with the Dutch invasion, many Jews from Amsterdam started to do business in Pernambuco. This is very interesting. And as we already have mentioned, the village of Olinda was destroyed by the invaders, and Recife was emerged as the new dynamic center of Dutch Brazil, which lasted for 24 years. The Dutch were interested in taking control of the entire sugar production chain, as they already had the refineries and the distribution net inside Europe. As Brazil was under control of the Spaniards, against whom the Dutch were at war, the War of Independence, the supply of sugar was cut off. The IC, so-called the West Indies Company, powerful company, was in charge of the military occupation. The Dutch conquered.
Was the sugar the biggest industry at the time in Olinda?
The biggest, the only one, the biggest, richest. The sugar was like kind of white gold of the gold and white.
I'll
white
take the
gold
sugar over the gold.
Yeah, it's to eat sugar for Europeans was a high level standard of life, and so that was very demanded all over Europe, and very important to the Dutch to control the whole production and distribution chain. And so the Dutch, when they came to Northeast, conquered a significant part of Brazilian Northeast, from the north of Bahia to Maranhão. And many Jews of that time purchased sugar mills and became very, very wealthy. Two communities were formed, the first and larger in Recife, the other smaller in the neighbor Mauritsstad, entirely built by John Morris of Nassau on the other side of the river. The community in Recife was called Kahal Kadosh Sur Israel, led by the famous Rabbi Yitzhak Abu Abda Fonseca that came from Amsterdam just to lead the community, local community. And the second community in Mauritsstad was called Kahal Kadosh Magen Avraham, led by Rabbi Moshe Raphael Dagilar. Both communities, Grace, built their own synagogues and became, of course, the first and the second synagogues in the Americas, or better to say, the first public ones. Why? If we consider the small and heroic hidden synagogues of Olinda and other small villages that have existed 100 years before, but
so these are the first
kept in secret and so on. When the Dutch were expelled by the Pernambucans and the territory returned to the Portuguese domain, the Jews were again vulnerable under the risk of being considered apostates by the Inquisition. Some went to the very interior of Brazil. This is very important to know, making giving heritage to many traditional families nowadays. Others returned to Amsterdam, and some fled to the north, reaching Dutch Guiana, the Caribbean, Florida, and even further landing in New Amsterdam, the future city of New York. And Daniela, you will talk about this.
Yeah, I know that's what we're going to focus on as well.
Yeah, and just for finishing, I would like to talk a little bit about nowadays Jewish community of Pernambuco. Because after the Dutch left Brazil, there was no more Jewish community in the Northeast until the early 20th century, last century, when many Ashkenazi came from Eastern Europe, mainly from Bessarabia, Poland, and Lithuania. In 1927, a synagogue was built in Boa Vista neighborhood, a central area that has become the favorite of the new Jewish community. A Hebrew school, a club, a cemetery, women's associations, charities, and young movements were quickly organized. In the 1940s and 1950s, there was an immigration to Israel, which has continued continued in a greater or lesser intensity until nowadays. There was also an internal migration at those times to Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo during the
that's
50s,
what my
the 60s. Yeah, it's your
my
story.
family in the 30s. Yeah, I think it was the 30s.
Yeah,
went
because
from
there the Jewish
Poland
community
to São
were
Paulo.
much bigger and so on, and much more economic opportunities, jobs, etc. So this migration occurred all over the, let's say, at least 30, 40 years.
Jacques, we have a question from Carol. She's via Facebook watching us, and she wants to know how large the community in Pernambuco is today.
Yeah, very good question, because Pernambuco has and had the Jewish community never in quantitative terms big. At most, we can say 2,000 persons, 2,000 members, considering children and the others. So that at those times was more or less, at the time of the Dutch, for example, the size of the community, I mean, in numerically speaking, was more or less the same as nowadays, not more than 2,000 in Jewish inhabitants. That's okay. Recife, as I say, the metropolitan area is 4 million. Pernambuco nowadays has 10 million, so that 2,000 is not that much in comparison of the whole population. And Grace,
But
I just, yeah, thank you. I just want to finish. What? Yeah, a small community. In comparison to the New York community, for example.
I'm saying they're small, but they're strong and seem to be
strong,
united, right?
With all this past and this history. For example, in 1989, this is very good to, perhaps I can finish saying this paragraph that the historian José Antônio Gonçalves de Melo launched in 1989 a book called Gente da Nação. This book aroused the attention of archaeologists to the place where it was the first synagogue in the Americas, that one of the Dutch times. After some surveys, the exact location was defined and the excavations were carried out to discover the well, the mikveh, very interesting, and the grounds of the ancient synagogue. The building was being reconstructed, and the current facade of Kahal Kadosh Tzur Israel can be observed in figure 5, please. Yeah, that's it. You can see again an ink drawn by the same artist, Cavani Rosas. The building was opened for visitors as a museum and eventually functions as a synagogue for festive occasions such as weddings and bar mitzvahs, as you can see in the next image, figure 6, please. Figure 6 shows, this is a bar mitzvah taking place in the interior of the synagogue, Kahal Kadosh Tzur Israel. Actually, is the bar mitzvah of my son, Bernardo.
That's cool. Mazal tov.
Yeah, thank you. It was a few years ago. To conclude, I would like to highlight an important phenomenon that is taking place in Pernambuco and throughout the Nordeste region of Brazil. That is the return of the Mojanus to Judaism. This is very interesting to highlight and to know the descendants of those new Christians who have preserved some of the old traditions over the centuries. Okay, that's my talk. I would like to give you back, Grace Moses.
We will have some time at the end for some questions and answers. And I would like to invite Dr. Daniela Levy. And she's going to talk to us about the Dutch period and the migration of the Jews from Pernambuco to New Amsterdam, today known as New York. And Daniela's English is really, really great, so I don't think I'm going to need to translate anything. But in case, I'm here, I can help, but you're doing great.
Thank you, Grace. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank the Smithsonian Folklife Festival for the invitation to be part in this great show. So I'm a historian from São Paulo. I work in a research group at the Jewish Museum of São Paulo. I wrote a book about the Jews who left Recife and went to New York. So that's why I'm... thank you, Jacques.
And we're waiting for the English translation.
Yeah, I'm waiting. The translation is already done, but I'm waiting for a publisher.
Anyone out there?
Maybe.
Yeah, let's get this published.
Grace, today I'm going to talk about history that I really like it, because it's a story of a victory and overcoming. The great adventure faced by the Jews in Recife and their path to New York. I intend to talk about the exodus of Jews and new Christians that after have lived for 24 years in Brazilian Northwest under Dutch rule, were forced to search for a new harbor. For beginning, we have to understand why the Jews from Amsterdam went to Brazil. The Dutch invaded and occupied the Brazilian Northwest, as Jacques told us, for 24 years. During this occupation, multiple ethnic groups and cultures coexist. Jews, eager to find a refuge in Brazil, arrived from several countries, such as Portugal, Spain, Poland, France, England, and their hope for freedom was the moving force that took them to distant places. They were eager to find a place to live, a community where neither their place of birth nor their religion would be a reason to marginalize them, or degrade them as a pariahs. Besides, they were Jews in Amsterdam already engaged in several trades, like Jacques told us, with sugar cane, and who envisioned the increased opportunities of a nation growth in newly conquered territories. They are part of the Western Indies Company plan. Western Indian Company, it was a trade company from Netherlands. The plan for conquer the Northwest Brazil, because some of them have been lived in Brazil. The Jews that live in Amsterdam, some of them have lived in Brazil before. You can show an image in black and white drawing. No, not this one, but this is okay. But the other one with a stamp with a phoenix inside. Yes, that one. This stamp represents that Sephardim had to build their community out of the ashes after being forced for over 100 years to practice Catholicism in Portugal. The Amsterdam community was made by these Sephardim from Portugal. Soon they arrived in Pernambuco. The Portuguese-Dutch Jews established a community similar to the Sephardi community of Amsterdam. The Jews engaged in intense intellectual activity and were able to build a synagogue, schools, and welfare agencies.
Daniela, I wanted to ask you something. What drew you to this subject? What was your connection to this?
It's a long story.
I see the phoenix and the being born out of the ashes, and I just wonder what brought you into this.
because it's linked to my personal story. When I got married, I met my husband in New York. So I came back to Brazil. Then we started to dating, and he is Jew, and I'm to get married with him. I had to convert.
Oh, okay. So you went through the process. Okay.
Yes.
Welcome to the tribe.
This is the return of Mojanus, perhaps.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm
I'm working on
joking.
that. Maybe. I don't know. I have my suspicions. So
Yeah.
I think I start to get lessons with Anita Novinsky. She is the first historian to work with New Christians and with Inquisition, the most prominent intellectual with this matter. So this starts me, how can I say, it's
You can talk in Portuguese too.
Okay, but
but you're doing great.
It's this. It's light me a fire inside, you know.
Yeah.
Yes. That's it.
That's why.
So you were intrigued by the history and
yes,
and made it your story.
Yes, that's why. So when they return to my to my speech, when the new Christians and the Jews arrived in Pernambuco, they established a community similar to the Sephardic community of Amsterdam, and the institution they are built. They were built in the street they call Jews Street. That one, yes. In the image, you can see a picture showing the street with a large trade houses and the residence with 2 or 3 floors. The first floor worked as a retail store, and the people used to live on the second floor. There was the place where the synagogue and the schools were built too.
So here they could practice Judaism completely in the open.
Yes, the first time in Brazil they could practice the Judaism very open. Some new Christians reconnect to the Judaism to join this group. During this period of Dutch occupation, Pernambuco experienced an extremely rich time, both culturally and materially. Pernambuco turned into a real metropolis with an intensive cultural life, where poets, scientists, and philosophers transformed Brazil into an intellectual center unique in South America. As businessmen, the Jews were particularly important in the establishment of the new Dutch commercial enterprises in Brazil, mainly because the Sephardim who arrived directly from Amsterdam were familiar with both the Portuguese and Dutch languages, like you, Grace, a fact that made them indispensable. From 1641 to 1654, the Portuguese tried to retrieve the land conquered by the Dutch without succeeding. While the war was being organized, the Portuguese diplomacy, in the figure of Father Antonio Vieira, negotiated with Holland financial advantages and an amount of money when the Brazilian Northwest was returned to the Portuguese. In 1648, the Dutch experienced the beginning of their defeat in Brazil, when their territories had already been reduced to the shores of Pernambuco. A bigger battle in the proximities of Recife, in a place called Guararapes, marked the end of the Dutch occupation in Brazil. And in the beginning of 1654, the city of Recife was in the chaos. The soldiers did not want to fight, and many of them directed their efforts towards looting and pillaging. There was a rumor that they were particularly interested in the residence of the Jews.
Yeah, I was going to say, this does not sound good for the Jewish people.
No. Among them, the house of the Jewish merchant José Frances, who was the wealthiest at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So the Jews had to fled again, or go into
yes, in the year of
Judaism again.
Yes, in the year of the 1654, the Portuguese conquered the Northwest and expelled the Dutch in the midst of the hunger and misery that the inhabitants of Recife have to face. Some people talk about they have to eat rats or mouses and maybe their horses. Then the war ended with a capitulation agreement whereby the Dutch would have a deadline to leave the area. With the defeat of the Dutch, the Jews could not stay in the area because if the return of the Portuguese government would be free to act, the Inquisition would be free to act. And the Jews were forbidden to live in Portuguese territory since 1497. The picture that you show before, it's a painting that shows this historic moment when the Lieutenant Barreto, the Portuguese Lieutenant Barreto, shake hands to the Dutch lieutenant, surrounded by soldiers.
Daniela, we have a question from one of our viewers.
Sure.
Adriano, he wants to know about the Jews that stayed inside the continent after the Jews from Recife left. If you can tell us anything about them.
Yeah, the people that chose to remain here, it was a new Christian. They escaped to the sertão, the innerland territories, and some of them start to raise cattle in the close to São Francisco River. They become the first pecuaristas. I don't know. Do you know this word in English?
No, you hit me with a curveball. I don't know how to translate that.
Pecuaristas. They raise cattle for sale.
I think that's good. Daniela, can we show the pictures of the modern day in Recife, of the Jews in Recife?
Sure.
Yeah, let's do that.
This is the street now with coloring houses.
Yeah, that looks so much like Pelourinho in Bahia.
Yeah, the coloring houses.
Yeah.
The synagogue is in this street. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The Rua dos Judeus, Jews Street.
Yeah, I like my Judaism with a side of samba too.
Yeah. And the owner of the house of the first synagogue, it's next to the synagogue. Two houses for I think for the left side on the synagogue. His name is Duarte Saraiva.
Mm-hmm. I want to encourage everyone to write us more questions and join us in this conversation.
When the Jews had to leave, part of the Jews went back to Holland. Some of them went to other regions, like Jacques told us, such as the Antilles Island, where they developed large sugarcane plantations. Mm-hmm. Thanks their knowledge acquiring Brazilian sugar mills. Others settled in Guianas, Barbados, Martinica, and a small group to New Amsterdam. This
Which
small
is
group,
New York today.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
this small group, 23 Jews, after going through rough times, such as pirate attacks, sinking of a vessel, and being arrested by Inquisition in Jamaica,
wow.
could manage, yes, a big journey, could manage to arrive in New Amsterdam, presently New York, saved by God, according to the report of the Chronicle Saul Livy Morteira in his work Providência de Deus com Israel.
And what industry did they go into? Like what work did they do when they reached New Amsterdam? Were they still in the sugar business, or what did they do?
No, because in New Amsterdam there wasn't a sugar mills
so
or
they
plantations.
had to change their craft.
Everything, yeah. In the beginning of life in North America, it was very hard. New Amsterdam was a small village, hardly populated, and ruled by a fanatic Calvinist that imposed serious difficulties to the newly arrived. In the picture that you show before, that shows the moment of arrival on the shore of Manhattan. You can see the structure of New Amsterdam in the background, and you can see also the diversity of the heritage of the population heritage of that colony. The man in the middle is the governor, Peter Stuyvesant, anti-Semitic, that wants to prevent the Jews establishing in the city. The Dutch Republic was reluctant to extend the benefits given to the Jews in Recife to the Jews that were in other Dutch colonies in America. Among all difficulties that Sephardi had to face, and some of them they were able to overcome, a Jew that pertained to the group of the 23, like I call Brazilians, stood out for his leadership and diplomacy. His name is Asser Levi. In New Amsterdam, Levi circulated between Christians and Jews and became one of the most respected men in that society. He became very close to the Protestants of several origins, like Dutch, English, and French. For others minorities that were in the village, such as Presbyterians, Lutherans, Puritans, and Catholics, groups that were also discriminated against, Levi was an individual who always defended civil rights, not only for Jews, but also for them, for everybody. Manhattan changed, becoming a city. With hardships, Jews were granted the right to participate in the business in their area. They owned a slaughterhouse, and that means they could nourish themselves accordingly to Jewish principles.
Slaughterhouses, so they could keep
slaughterhouse,
kosher.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so they could keep the kosher meat.
Yes.
Okay.
With that intent, they request a permit to the Administrative Council of New Amsterdam to buy a land that would be used for a Jewish cemetery. A few years later, the government granted them a small piece of land far away from the Manhattan walls. That was the first cemetery of North America. Today, its location is unknown. You just know the location of the second one. In the year of 1660, the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam was conquered by England. The colony's administration did not undergo many alterations. Many of the people that integrate the Dutch administration maintained their jobs as assistants to the British. For the Jews, the restrictions mostly to the political role were maintained, as well as the rights they already conquered. It was that time, during the British administration, the Jews obtained permission to build the second Sephardi cemetery in
And that is still
1682.
around. And that one we know the location, but not the first one.
Yes, it can be visited today. And then we can find there tombstones, inscriptions in Portuguese, in Ladino also. In time, the descendants of Sephardi pioneers sought to marry Jews that arrived from other regions, mainly from England and the Caribbean countries, with whom they had intense economic relations. Their families reached distinguished position among colonial elite, where they had an active role in public works, building hospitals, schools, libraries, mingling with the academic milieu, holding public offices, and contributing to the economic progress of the United States of America. Till today. Yeah. From a political standpoint, many descendants of the first Sephardim Jews, Dutch and Portuguese, fought side by side with other Americans in the struggle for the freedom of the 13 colonies during the Revolution War. After the American War of Independence, the descendants of these Jews obtained their citizenship. The religion was not anymore an obstacle. Jews were not anymore a tolerated minority, but North American citizens.
Yeah, they were part of the community.
Yes. And when the President George Washington decreed that November 26 would be Thanksgiving Day, there were parades all over the country. And among the several tables with food that were displayed, there were kosher food.
Oh, wow.
As well.
So they had some gefilte fish on Thanksgiving?
Not gefilte fish, because the most of them it was from...
Yeah.
It's Sephardic, yes. But kosher food, it is. Jews in that time were not a tolerant minority anymore, but were legally U.S. citizens. There was the first time in Jewish history that Jews of the diaspora were considered full citizens. A new era had begun, and to this date, Jews have the right. The Brazilians, as I call them, and their descendants spread for various regions of the United States, and were important in the struggle for civil rights, for tolerance and freedom. The Henriques, Lucenas, Costas, Andrades, Gomes, Ferreiras helped to build a new world of free and equal citizens.
Doing their part for Tikkun Olam.
Yes. The next picture that you showed, could you, yes, that one. It's a monument built in honor to the Jewish Pilgrim Fathers in Manhattan. It's a big plate with 2 lions and a Magen David in the center. It's written, "The State of New York, to honor the memory of the 23 men, women, and children who landed in September 1654 and founded the first Jewish community in North America." And in the bottom, there is a menorah engraving. So that's the story that I like it so much.
Yeah, I can see why. I do too. Yeah, this is...
It's a winner
story. This is fascinating. Thank you both so much for this. I would like to take any questions from our audience. If anyone has any questions or anything they want to know or share. So I have one question. How do the new Jewish communities in Brazil, how do they live now? How do they connect to their history? How does that play out now?
Well, actually, I would like to focus perhaps on Pernambuco and Nordeste and this new phenomenon that is the return of the Mojanus. This is very important in the heritage of those Jews from the very beginning of the colony of Brazil,
Right.
that had to practice hidden Judaism, and so that 500 years later, the descendants are returning, and this is quite interesting to observe. It's like a repairment of an injustice that was committed 500 years ago. So it's great to
just
emphasize this aspect, Grace.
Just on the side, sorry. Last year I did Rosh Hashanah. I was lucky enough to do Rosh Hashanah with my family in Salvador. I wish I was there this year, but we won't talk about that.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova to everyone. And when we went to the synagogue, there were a lot of what's the term for the
Mojanus
there that came back.
B'nai as well.
That came
back
to
Salvador,
the Jewish religion.
In
really
Bahia is the same phenomenon, the same return of those descendants of the new Christians all over Nordeste mainly.
Jacques, someone pointed out that the term Mojano is no longer used. Is that right?
It was a pejorative, not a good term in the past. Nowadays, is used with pride, actually, because it lost its original meaning, that was cerdo in Spanish, pork, and so that it was a word, not pejorative. I mean. But nowadays it's undertaken with kind of proud,
connection.
just to emphasize that they are Jewish descendants and wanting to recover this past heritage.
But can I say something? But today the term of Mojano expand the meaning and start to studied by anthropologists and the other scientists. This term it's explain how they feel with a divided soul.
Mm-hmm.
Because Mojano is not the Jew who practiced the Judaism secret, but now it starts to be used for everybody that is between one condition to another. Yes.
Okay. I have another question from the audience, and they want to know how the Jews are treated today in Brazil.
Well, in Brazil, Nordeste, there are several communities. The main ones are in São Paulo and Rio, and also Porto Alegre. Paraná, Curitiba has a quite interesting community, but in Nordeste we are not very. I told not quantitative big, but yes, we continued with our religion and traditions, and in all sorts of professional areas of actuation, business, industries, commerce, and at the universities, a lot of professors and three professionals. I mean, physicians and teachers and all sort of professions. So quite integrated. I mean, in the
integrated, but still keeping to tradition.
yeah, exactly, precisely, Grace. That's it.
There is a different groups. Some of them is very integrated and not maybe even assimilated, but some of them is keep their tradition, and some of them it's very close to the tradition. So,
But this is in São Paulo mainly, yeah.
Yeah.
We are in São Paulo, and we are focusing more
In São
in
Paulo and in
Nordeste.
Rio,
Yeah.
There is a
many several communities.
Yeah, several communities.
So as we come to a close, I'd like to hear your perspective on both of you as historians. What do you think that younger generation can learn about this? Like, what's your hope for the
You
future
start, Daniela?
with your work?
You can hear.
I just wanted to know what you want, what your hope is for younger generations to learn from this history.
I think, for me, I think they need to learn how to keep their traditions and pass to their children, and to keep their background, and to learn how hard for the parents before, the antepassados, to keep these these costumes and everything.
And I would like to emphasize always this phenomenon that is becoming stronger and stronger, that is the return of the descendants of those new Christian families from the past. And this is very interesting, because for me this is real repairment of an injustice, so that I want to the youngers nowadays, they know this heritage, including ethnic heritage, you know, from the Jews, not only the Black, the Indians, and the Portuguese, from Portuguese Europeans, but also the Jews Europeans that came to Brazil, came to Nordeste in the quality of new Christians, and helped to build this giant country that is Brazil.
That is so important, yeah.
That's it.
Well, thank you both so much. I know that, especially for me, I think for everybody in the audience, but the close connection that I feel to this story, like I said, I like my Judaism with a side of samba. I'm very proud of my heritage, and I love digging into the history. So thank you again so much. And thank you, Dr. Daniela Levy and Dr. Jacques Ribemboim. And I would like to thank the audience for participating, and all those who watched and listened and commented. Thank you again to the National Museum of American Jewish History for their support. Learn more about current programming and exhibits at NMAJH by visiting nmajh.org. I wanted to close by offering thanks to Pablo de Oliveira, Pablo Molinero, Cristina Diaz Carrera, Elisa Huff, Sarah Rothman, Jenny Maycock, Diane Nutting, Alex Taggart, Jason Morris, and Sabrina Lynn Motley for their production, promotion, and administrative efforts. I want to thank the Smithsonian Folklife so much for making me part of this amazing conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope we do more programming on this subject. I, for one, loved it. Thank you so much. Please follow the Smithsonian Folklife page here on Facebook to get notifications about future events and find us also on Instagram and YouTube. Visit our website and come back here for our next program. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Grace.
Great team, great team.
I know, right?
Very good.
I like it
Thank
so
you
much.
very much.
Yeah.
Se você tá afim de ofender, é só chamá-lo de moreno, pode crer. É ter respeito à raça, alienação. Aqui no Ilê,